So, Bo Nickal faced Paul Craig on Saturday, and he looked pretty good. It was a pretty clean win, very much a hit and not get hit kind of fight, but I think everyone can agree that fight was a little bit boring. It's funny to me that we put certain fighters that have a lot of hype behind them into a category where we put all the responsibility on them to make the fans impressed or to make the fights entertaining, and we sometimes forget that there's another guy in the octagon with them. We saw this when Adesanya had his stretch of title defenses where he fought Robert Whittaker in the rematch, he fought Marvin Vettori and Jared Cannonier. We seem to blame Adesanya for all of those fights being boring when his opponents weren't really contributing their share of the entertainment value, I guess we could say. Like, why is it one guy's responsibility to take risks and try to get a finish when the other guy can play it safe and completely dodge all the criticism? This whole situation seems to be happening in this fight with Bo Nickal and Paul Craig, and people are blaming Bo for making the fight boring. Even Paul Craig was chirping him in the middle of the fight while the fans were booing him, which is just so silly because I would argue that Craig was equally responsible for this fight being underwhelming. At the same time, though, I get it. There's a lot of hype around Bo Nickal. Even the UFC put him on the main card of UFC 300. And the only reason why that is because the UFC is trying to build him up as the next big thing. They want him to be the next McGregor, the next Khamzat Chimaev, the next Ilia Topuria. And when there's hype, there's expectations that he's going to impress with his performances. Conor McGregor did it, Khamzat Chimaev did it, Ilia Topuria did it, and the UFC is trying to add Bo to the list. So the question is, has Bo lived up to the hype? I would say no, and it's not because he gave a bad performance, because he landed all the major clean shots in this fight. He never got taken down, never really took any damage, which on paper sounds pretty good, but it's because he revealed his mindset when it comes to fighting. His general approach to fighting is not where it needs to be if he wants to win fans over. I always say this, but there's a difference between winners and killers. There's a difference between the people who go in there to win and the people who go in there to get finishes. Oliveira, Islam, Topuria, Khamzat, Pereira, these are guys that go in there to get finishes. Sean Strickland, Merab, Bilal, Leon Edwards. These are guys that go in there and do whatever they need to do to win. And there's nothing wrong with that. And even there's a case to be made that the way that the UFC pays fighters incentivizes them to just go in there to get a win and come out taking as little damage as possible. Because most of the time, the people in the first list end up taking more damage than the people in the second list. And everybody I named on both lists are great fighters. It's just that generally the fans want to tune in to see the killers. And Bo revealed that he's not really a killer. And he was abundantly clear about that. Even in the post-fight press conference, when everybody was booing him, he outright said that he was very happy with his performance, even though it maybe wasn't pleasing to the fans. He's content to do whatever he needs to do to get the cleanest win possible. And that might not be a bad idea when it comes to developing himself as a mixed martial artist, but it's not necessarily the best way for him to win fans over. So in short, I get the disappointment. It didn't surprise me at all that Bo didn't shoot any takedowns because Paul Craig's submission ability off of his back is his best skill. So him taking Craig down is kind of playing into his strengths. And Bo had a massive speed advantage. He's significantly more athletic. And Craig's striking isn't anything to write home about. So it just didn't... I think strategically, it was smart for him to keep the fight on the feet and also develop his skills in striking a little bit more as well. To say that Bo's wrestling is overrated because he didn't take Craig down is just silly, because obviously Bo Nickal can take Craig down. It's just whether or not that's the smartest thing for him to do in this fight. This is not a wrestling match. This is an MMA fight. And so he needs to consider all the possibilities. Craig's ability to submit him off his back. I mean, Craig is the only person to beat Magomed Ankalaev, and he submitted him off of his back. Even if Bo is a phenomenal wrestler and could very easily take Paul Craig down, sometimes the smartest thing to do is to keep the fight on the feet, where you have the largest advantages, and Craig doesn't really have anything to offer. If Bo chose to take the fight to the ground and ended up getting submitted, he would be taking a lot of criticism that he had a speed advantage, he was more athletic, he could have kept the fight on the feet and easily won by scoring points, but instead he tried to take arguably the best submission artist at middleweight to the ground. hindsight is always 2020. In fact, I would bet most of the taunting that Craig was doing was just trying to get into Bo's head and frustrate him and make him want to shoot a takedown to silence the boos from the crowd and ultimately allow Craig to work his game. I think Bo still has a lot to improve on, especially in the striking. His striking is still very one-dimensional. He still looks like a wrestler trying to do stand-up and not really a complete mixed martial artist yet. He really just stuck to the overhand, a few good crosses to the body. I think what people need to realize about Bo Nickal is that he's still relatively inexperienced for the level of competition he's facing. This was only his 7th pro MMA fight, and there are very, very few people on the UFC roster who are facing somebody at the level of Paul Craig in their 7th pro fight. The only other person I can really think of is Alex Pereira, who was probably facing Sean Strickland or something like that at this point in his career. Bo isn't necessarily young though. He's 28 years old, which to put into perspective is a year older than Ilia Topuria, who is clearly a more complete and well-rounded mixed martial artist than Bo Nickal is. I still think Bo is a promising prospect though. I just think the most important thing for him to do right now at this point in his career is to get as much experience as possible and to improve his stand-up and make his striking a little more well-rounded. I think it would be wise for the UFC to continue giving him unranked fighters to build up his experience until it really looks like he's ready to take on ranked opponents. And it seems like Bo has a clear goal right now in his journey in the UFC. He's trying to gain experience, improve, and he's not letting the fans distract him from that, which I can respect. But with his current skill level as a mixed martial artist, time isn't exactly on his side. Like I said, he's 28 years old, so I think it would be smart for him to take the next 1 to 2 years and fight as many unranked opponents as possible. If he can get 5 or 6 fights over the next 1 to 2 years to improve his stand-up, improve his experience competing in MMA at a high level, that'll put him at around 30 years old. And at that point, he can start his real journey to the title and work his way up through the top 15, which in itself might take a few years, at which point he'll still be in his physical prime when he's fighting for the belt potentially. But I think that he's old enough right now that he really needs to be intentional about being active and picking the right fights to gain experience as quickly as possible. So is Bo Nickal the next big thing? I think it's too early to make that call. I still think he has a bright future though. Even Khabib had a relatively slow start to his career in terms of stardom, and he ended up being one of the biggest names in the organization. But is Bo overrated right now? Absolutely. The UFC definitely takes a bit of a gamble when they pick which guys that they think are going to be the next big star and how they market them that way. And I think they jumped the gun a little bit with Bo Nickal. He's not the fast rising star that McGregor or Khamzat Chimaev were. And I think it's time for the UFC to have a little course correction. I think for now it's best that Bo probably stays on the prelims until he starts to really demonstrate that he's making his rise to the top.